Welcome to the latest webinar, the latest roundtable we have as part of Net Zero Festival this week from the installer. Today we've got a really exciting discussion around the electrification of heating. We are talking about this because reaching net zero in the UK is going to require huge shifts in the way that energy is delivered to consumers in zero carbon forms. So the electrification through, perhaps it's electricity, perhaps it's hydrogen, hot water and heat networks, it's all going to have to come from low carbon sources and require extensive electrification. So we're talking about how we can get there. Basically today. So these energy systems are going to enable a switch to low carbon heating in new build and also the retrofit of existing homes. So we're going to talk a lot about that. We have a wonderful panel to discuss these issues today. So just introduce very quickly, we have a couple of installers, Steve Calvert and Jonathan Cooke, who are experienced in renewable energy, qualified sort of installers around sort of biomass, solar thermal, heat pumps. So we're going to answer sort of all the challenges and feel free to ask questions about that there. We also have Brett Amflet, who is the policy director from the Builders Merchants Federation, and Rob Whitney, Senior Sales Development Specialist at Resideo, and we thank Resideo for sort of hosting this discussion. So really excited that you guys can all join us. We're going to have a quick conversation here, but do fire your questions in through the Q&A and through the chat, because we'd love to answer as many questions as you guys have as possible as well today. And that's sort of the purpose of this session. So yes, Bill, we will be able to sort of send around, the presentation. It's really just this sort of infographic. The rest of it is a discussion, but we'll record it and send that to you afterwards as well to watch in your own time. So could I just start? Rob, can you hear us there? Just a word on sort of grid decarbonisation, why we're looking at net zero, what it is anyway. I think Rob might be having a couple of technical issues that we were just before the start. So Brett, perhaps that's something you could pick up for us.
Okay, and thanks to you and thanks to Rob Whitney and Resideo for sponsoring us all today and inviting us to join the panel. Just before we join the webinar today, I was just
absolutely. Hopefully you can hear me.
Go ahead, Rob.
Can you hear me?
We can now, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that, guys. That's really dialed in using my iPhone. Obviously the background to all this is this journey towards zero carbon and net zero as it's being described now. And what's really unlocking all of this possibility for electrifying heating and vehicles and many other things in our society is the transition away from burning fossil fuels, generating electricity, to going towards renewable energy. And when we talk about renewable energy, we're talking about solar, we're talking about wind and biomass and things like that. So yeah, these days, and actually it's got to the point where there's so much renewable energy being generated, the carbon intensity of mains electricity can be actually below natural gas. So if you had this conversation a few years ago, it would have been gas is lower carbon than electricity, but now it's kind of gone the other way. And doing electrified heating, like heat pumps, it really sort of swings the balance in the favour of heat pumps in a lot of situations. So that's the background and why we're looking at using electricity for heating for future systems alongside other low carbon fuels like hydrogen. But hydrogen's for another day.
Great. Thanks, Rob. Maybe Brett, would you like to just add in on that?
Yes, and thank you, Rob. He's right. The age-old phrase of "we've gone on a journey." Well, we have gone on a journey because 30 years ago we had a centralised electricity-generated electricity board, and so on and so on. We've got to a situation now where we're now talking about democracy and really low-level on-site, not only generation but consumption of what you generate, and it is through products that Rob and other companies make. But the whole question of, again, today is not for hydrogen, but that's part of the equation. The companies obviously I speak for represent both sides of the argument in terms of insulation first before we get to the services and the heating and the kinds of things that we're going to be taking through, particularly from our two installer guests. So a lot of my time is spent talking not to installers but to politicians and journalists to try and cut through, because just to end on, I think science and business know how we can get on the way to net zero. I think the public, as we've seen with their expressions of whether it's through Extinction Rebellion, but also retired people are wanting their pension funds to move money into low carbon, zero carbon businesses. I think it's really a question of how the policymakers, the tax regime and so on catches up with that. And that's what I would be interested to hear as we electrify the homes in the next hour. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that. And Jonathan, just from a sort of installer's perspective, would you echo some of those comments? What are some of the challenges perhaps that you kind of see with this journey?
Just education, basically. If people aren't aware of things, and the UK building industry is incredibly conservative, so they absolutely hate doing anything different or anything new. And it's a question of dragging them kicking and screaming into the future, I think.
Yeah. And could I also then come in as well on sort of heat pumps specifically? Do we think these are they the best way of decarbonising heat? They're not new inventions, sort of, are they? Do we have a view on perhaps why they've not taken off before?
Well, they've been around. I mean, the Festival of Britain in London, the festival hall was heated with a heat pump, and I think that was 1951 or 54. I can't remember. It was before I was born, but that was heated with a heat pump taking heat from the Thames. So it's not a new technology. I mean, fridges have been around for 100 years. So it's just the problem is the quality of the housing stock, and heat pumps aren't really suitable for using in poorly insulated, drafty Victorian houses. And I think the majority of the UK housing stock is Victorian and Georgian. But please correct me if
people like the look of them. That's also part of it.
Yeah, they like the look of them. They have nice room sizes, nice ceiling heights, and you can't hear your neighbours screaming through the wall. Well, you can, but not as badly as in a modern house. So horses for courses, I think the answer is.
Interesting. And Steve, maybe I could bring you in on this, and if you could come off mute in a sec. What about your sort of experience with installing heat pumps as well? Have you good, bad experiences? Is it horses for courses? Anything you'd like to throw in there?
Yeah, we've been installing for well over 10 years now. The early ones weren't inverter driven; they were fixed output. So any sort of little hiccup in the design was a tough one to correct, and people were getting huge electric bills. New ones now are inverter driven, and designs are getting a lot better, and people are getting a lot better at installing them and stuff. So I think it's more of a scared of change or something like that. Everyone's used to fixed high temperature or even modulating high temperature now. So it's just getting people out of the sort of shell and starting to install them, starting to redesign systems as well. That's all. So it's easy to do. It's just a matter of changing ways.
So would you perhaps say that actually maybe some of those previous experiences people might have had with electric heating? You know, maybe they had sort of sky high bills initially. You know, are we now, have things changed so much that we can be confident that these aren't going to cost consumers like a huge amount of money to run?
Yeah, I can come in on that one. I mean, it is all about careful specification with the heat pumps. And the first thing to recognise is that they don't have the same output as a boiler. Typically, what you'll find with a boiler in a home, you know, if it's a system boiler, they'll typically be sort of 15 kilowatts. Most heat pumps are typically less than 10. So it's all about running the heat pump efficiently. And to do that means running at a lower flow temperature, much lower than you would see with a normal high temperature radiator system. Heat pumps love big radiators and underfloor heating. And the key really is to make sure that the system is designed optimally. You can't just do a like-for-like replacement and hope for the best outcome. It's all about really getting a full heat loss calculation, optimizing the radiator sizing, making sure you've not got any big resistance in the pipes. You know, maybe go into the larger size pipes as well, less resistant valves, and then you'll be approaching a system that is optimized for a pump. And the heat pump manufacturers offer lots of great advice. We provide controls for heat pumps as well. Basically, all the normal thermostats that you'll see, the modern generation ones anyway, are perfectly suitable for working with heat pumps. And we can give advice on the best way to use them. But really, you need to get away from this old school 2 hours in the morning, 7 hours at night, flat out heating profile. It's all about running the heat pump almost continuously with some small setbacks maybe. But unless you do that, you're not going to optimize the efficiency of the heat pump, and the bills are likely to be higher than your existing gas boiler with running on gas, which is, you know, a quarter of the price.
And is this maybe, Jonathan, something that, you know, is it just education, or is that sort of training? Is it quite a, you know, how hard is it to
I think when I go to see when a client rings me up, the first thing I say is, you know, what's your fabric like? What can you do to improve the fabric? Because just swapping from one technology to another won't save you any money. You've got to look at the fabric of the building. You know, have you got 300 mil of insulation in the loft? Have you got good quality double glazed windows which are draft tight? Can you improve your front door? Can you do external wall insulation? All these are a precursor to changing technologies for heating. It's very rare that I don't think I've ever been to a building where you could just simply put a heat pump in and walk away.
And so are there, maybe ask Steve this as well, like as an sort of an installer, does this create more problems for you? You know, it means you have to bring in people with different skills, different team in to look at it rather than just installing a gas boiler? Is that something to consider?
If you're going to look at a property that is on gas or anything high temperature, the first thing when you switch into low temperature is, can the current system run it? I.e., is the main lines ready for a delta T of 5 instead of 10 or 20 or whatever it was designed at the radiators, and that all revolves around the heat loss. And then, like you were saying, if the heat loss is coming up too high, then what can we do to bring the heat loss down to bring it more in line with the heat pump? So I don't think it's ever going to be a simple case of put the heat pump onto the existing system. And if it does, that's where the heat pumps will start generating a bad name, because they're going to be sky high bills. So it's not always, you know, just stick it in and walk away. So even though we're seeing high temperature units come out now, people are forgetting the high temperature unit is for the hot water, not for the heating. It's so that we don't need a Legionnaires boost, so we can do it straight from the heat pump. But that's not to run the heat pump on heating constantly like that. They still have to be low temperature weather comps, preferably 45 and below. So there's going to be a bit of a dodgy on it, to be honest with you, and it's going to be really feeling out until people realise that low temperature at delta T of 5 is a completely different beast high temperature at delta T 20. So that's going to be the pinpoint at the moment, and it may take a few years for people to start, getting into it. So there may be quite a few bad installs going in, but it's just going to be the nature of the beast until everyone understands what they're supposed to be doing, to be honest with you.
I think the critical thing to bear in mind is if you're running on a delta T of 5, you've got to double the flow, because you're running at half the temperature difference. You need to run twice as much fluid through the system in order to deliver the same amount of heat to a room or to a house. So therefore you need to double the flow, and you can double the flow by putting in a large pump, which will make it very noisy, or you correctly size the pipes, but that means doubling the pipes inevitably, and also doubling or even tripling the radiator size in order to achieve a COP of 3.7 or better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Rob, there's a question sort of coming in already from the audience here around, we've talked about these, the heat pump technology and how it's been improving. Would you say, is it worth waiting a few years? Do you see a few years down the line it getting even better, or how would you look at that at the moment?
I think, the industry will continue to improve. There's work being done at the moment of getting rid of the refrigerant gas in heat pumps and actually using CO2 in them, which could also be some benefits for the environment as well, obviously. But no, there's no need to wait. This is mature technology. They've been around for decades. There's nothing experimental about them. How to fit them is very, very well understood. And there are many installers out there already that are having very, very good businesses fitting them. They're actually less maintenance than a gas boiler. There's less to go wrong. And yeah, there's no reason to wait. They've kind of had a bit of a checkered history because of misapplication in the past. But they are very, very good technology. But they're not the only technology. So, one of the other things we wanted to talk about today was looking at the direct electric options as well. So a heat pump is very good because it multiplies the energy that you put in. But there's also good options these days with smart electric and far infrared panels as well, which can be used more discreetly in areas, and electricity 1-to-1, get that multi in certain areas be quite good, particularly where you've got areas like flats. So it would encourage installers to also look into things like far infrared panels as well, which can also be zoned using normal sorts of heating controls like we provide.
And sort of, should we, like you say, sort of we can sort of move on the discussion as well, talking about, there might be some resistance perhaps to some of these sort of direct electric heating from
definitely from me. Count me out on that one. That's the worst thing you can do as far as I'm concerned.
And why is that, Jonathan?
Because if we're trying to reduce our electricity usage, if you use direct electric, you're getting 1 unit in for 1 unit of heat. If you're using a heat pump, you're using 1 unit of heat, so you're getting 2.7 units free. 1 unit of electricity for 2.7 units of free heat, plus the one that you've put in. So I would never, if possible, countenance direct electric. I mean, obviously, in certain places that works, but ideally, no.
What about when we've got, should we also talk about, like hydrogen, and we also talk about sort of solar electric as well? Like, anyone talk about, some of these solutions? How what are their benefits?
PV is very good. You know, for the summer, you can supply your entire electric consumption, but the problem is the sun shines during the day and you're inevitably needing your power at 8 o'clock at night. And battery storage, you know, like the Tesla Powerwall, for example, can offset your production with your consumption, but it's a philosophical decision to use it rather than a money thing. You know, do you want to help save the planet? Put in a Powerwall if you do, but it's not going to. It's the money side of it isn't brilliant. People like, have you heard of Solar Edge? They produce PV systems where you can monitor your consumption and production on a, you know, minute by minute basis. So you can see, and it's all graphed up over years or months or days or hours. So you can see what you're using and when it's usable. So if you're charging an electric car, you can plug it in and it'll only charge when you've got spare power. So it means you can basically charge a car for free.
That's a really good point. And just looking at the Q&As, we've got a question that asked about that. It's a question from Joe. Do you think the electricity grid can handle both electrification of heating and electric vehicles at the scale that the government wants? It's a really, really great question and a big concern amongst a lot of people. I'm working on one of the project teams that's trying to address this smart energy question. And actually, the two are not opposing. And you can imagine a future where you'll come home with your electric vehicle, plug it in. For the peak areas, the home could actually run off the electric vehicle batteries. It's called vehicle to grid. And then when it's off peak and there's less demand, the electricity can then charge up the battery for the vehicle and make it ready to be driven the next day. So it's all about having a smart grid and an intelligent grid that's balanced. And the more intelligent the equipment becomes, the home, the heat pump, the vehicle, the more it actually solves the problem rather than creates the problem.
Octopus Energy actually are supplying a vehicle to grid system at the moment using leased Nissan Leaf cars.
Yeah.
And the reason it's leased is because they don't know what the long-term effect on the battery is going to be. Indeed. So they're running a pilot scheme at the moment to see whether it actually improves battery life or whether it degrades it. And obviously we're all waiting for the answer for that one.
Yeah, I think there was a big concern about battery life, a few years ago. But it seems to be that even with DC fast charging, the batteries are very resilient. I've read that thing too about the conditioning that would be gone through every night through being a field to grid application would actually help the battery. So it's great that there's all these technology demonstrators in place that are hoping to sort of debug and demystify some of these concerns.
And sort of, Brett, could you also give us a bit of a perspective on, how responsive have you found government, or how much, where's the priority, do you think, in terms of the various different options here? What do you kind of see?
I think the answer to the question, which I jotted down here, was about, was the grid able to take the dual demands of electricity in houses and for electric vehicles? And just to kind of be controversial and shake things up, we've been going 10 or 15 minutes. The answer is no, because in a moment I'll come to transport. But the question I was just reading this morning before I joined you all is that yesterday the government published a response to one of its own consultations about the planning permission system and how you would future-proof that to allow for the installation of electric substations or whatever it is that we decide that we go forward with in terms of local authorities and planning. And the question then of cars, whether it's from the car, as Rob very kindly explained there, the car going to the grid, there is actually a consultation going the reverse, which is why occasionally when I talk to MPs, obviously we won't have party conferences in 2 months' time, or else I'd be doing more of this for you, the question of, there is currently a consultation about whether new homes, I think if I remember rightly, it's 3-bed or bigger family detached and semi-detached homes with a garage should come with EV charge points fitted as standard. Now, whether that family then has an EV themselves, that's a secondary matter. But that whole question then of, well, there isn't enough grid capacity. And if I just turn the coin the other side, as merchants, one of the things, not for today, is the whole question of clean air and air pollution and so on and so forth. And part of the response that we're doing with that is that many of merchants, it's slightly easier for plumbing and heating because you're using electric vans, perhaps more than HGVs. But part of that question then came up about, do we have the infrastructure for charge points, as Rob said, whether it's DC fast charging at a motorway service station or in people's houses? And I think the answer still is no. So the challenge, which I'm going to take away, one of my action points from today is to try and work out, having listened to my 2 new installer friends there, is what is it that will help the ordinary householder, the voter, to really go with this? If they're told they're going to have a bigger radiator, my suspicion is they might sort of freak out a little bit about that. But if we can try and tie this, and Rob is right on the money here, so to speak, that how you show the interchangeability of people's lives, of how they go to work. Obviously, at the moment, none of us are going to work because we're not in the office. But that question there. So I don't think the answer to the question that you read out was, I don't think we've yet got anywhere near the trajectory we need to make sure that the grid will have enough electricity to go round.
Can I put in something?
I'm happy to defend that, but from where I'm sitting, I think, as I said at the opening preamble, I think the voters, I think science and business people like ourselves are further ahead than policymakers and tax and those kind of slower moving governmental structures, if you want for a better word, over.
Well, I think the first thing is fabric first, because if you don't want larger radiators, then you've got to insulate the houses better, and then you don't need larger radiators, and you also then have smaller heat pumps with smaller consumption of electricity. So fabric first is absolutely the key to all of this. Instead of financially supporting heat pumps, they should be financially supporting external wall insulation. That really is to me the fundamental stepping point.
Yeah, it's something that we used to do, and then we kind of lost our way on it a little bit. Up until 3-4 years ago, there was programmers doing cavity walls in 3 or 4 years, and now it's all starting up again. So absolutely right. The key to all this is reducing your waste and reducing your heat loss through the buildings. There's a great question actually that's come up on the Q&A from Mark. And the question is, so for a normal house with RADs, it's not returns and triple panel RADs, so hybrid ? And it's a really great question there. I mean, if I can speak from my own personal experience, so we've got like a 1950s, 1960s house, and we fitted a brand new boiler about 6 years ago, A-rated condensing boiler with either home controls, so a class A+1, A+ system. So as good as you can get, really. After that, we've done more insulation on the property. We've replaced the windows, and actually, our home would be an ideal one now to fit a heat pump, to retrofit a heat pump. Because along when we did the upgrade to the heating, we did fit larger radiators because we were pursuing condensing of the system. So really, I think if gas boilers were installed the best way they could be today, with low flow temperature, it would make the future refit of systems for heat pumps a lot easier.
I agree.
So, you know, there's another question from Dan. Are there rules of thumb about assessing eligibility for heat pumps? Could we propose that homes above an EPC of C could be eligible? Well, you've got to really be a little bit careful with these EPCs, but you know, you need to do a proper heat loss calculation, room by room, not just a whole house thing. But yeah, I think as a rule of thumb, that's probably about right. But a heat pump can be fitted in whatever property. It's all about system design, and having large enough radiators, avoiding your resistance in the pipework because of having small bore systems, and you know, where you might have a 15 mil run today, making sure that's a 22. You know, you just can't bang in a heat pump on an existing S plan or Y plan and hope to be a proper system upgrade.
Yeah. And Rob, I'm going to take another question here. This is from Harry Swinburne. You know, how will, maybe this is to the installers, guys, how will the thousands of gas central heating installers transition to electrification? You know, which is really what we're talking about.
It's a great question.
I think that might be answered tomorrow with the hydrogen thing. Because
so do you see that is that the major, you know, electrification you know, system we're looking at? Go on, Jonathan.
It might be. I'm also a biomass installer, so I think that hydrogen is possibly part of the answer, but we'll have to leave that till tomorrow, I think.
Okay, all right. Look out for that session tomorrow.
Rob,
on,
if I may, Ben, don't forget, the day after the budget, where did Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, go? Answer: Worcester Bosch in Worcester to be shown the hydrogen stuff.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Valiant have also got hydrogen boilers working now as well.
Yeah, and Baxi too, and so on and so forth. But isn't it interesting that he went to a marginal Conservative seat where the number one boiler manufacturer in this country is? I think there's there's a bit of a hint there, I think.
Yeah.
I think hydrogen is a potential option, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. It's a development path. Really, I think the electrification is a no. It's low risk. And certainly, you know, combining heat pumps with existing systems, that's sort of the last part of the question, wasn't it? Hybrid. So we're hearing a lot about this term hybrid, and it's a shame because it's not really defined what hybrid means. What it's actually talking about in this context is combining an air-to-water heat pump into an existing heating system alongside the existing gas boiler, which would then relieve the gas boiler to only really being needed in the depths of winter. And it's like a bridge technology, a bit like people buy hybrid cars when they really could have bought an electric car. Yeah. So it gives confidence to the consumer that they will have an efficient system. It's not going to cost them the earth to run. But actually what they will find is that with maybe a few more improvements to the fabric of the building, that gas boiler never runs. And then they can just focus on having a heat pump. And it's all about taking the consumer with you, isn't it? You can't just force all this stuff on people and expect it to happen. And picking up on Harry's question about the training. So there's lots of skills that an existing gas boiler installer will be able to use for future low carbon heat. The actual installation of a heat pump compared to a boiler is very, very straightforward. Obviously, you've got the wet side that connects to all the pipes and radiators. But the electrical installation is very, very straightforward. And most of the heat pumps are actually self-contained. So you don't need to get a refrigerant gas engineer in. So yeah, there is a transition there. But I think probably what will happen is you'll get a new breed of installers getting trained up for heat pumps. There will be existing heating engineers and gas installers that transition over, but I think most of it will come from a newer generation of installer.
And a couple more questions. That's great points. Is how do you overcome the difficulty of customers who don't have the money ready to, big money to buy these systems? Are there smaller things that we can get?
Well, there is the RHI, which nobody's mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
There's the renewable heat incentive, which gives you, some money back, but they've obviously got to have enough money in the kitty in the first place. But, there is government support for installing heat pumps.
Okay. And Ian Furlong also asks, will the new grant system that has been announced filter down to smaller installers, or not just on government grants? I'm not sure specifically which one.
Yeah,
you're talking about there, Rob.
I can answer that one, guys. The one that Rishi Sunak announced the other day, this part of the stimulus package. We've been doing some digging onto it, and it actually looks like improvement of heating system that's been going on about what will replace the RHI. And it'll be the sort of clean heat approach, and that will be focused mainly around heat pumps, from what we can tell. But yeah, this immediate thing that's going to come out is going to be mainly insulation, and it looks like it's going to go down the same route as the eco funding, Eco 3, whereas the installer will need to be part of this group, be Trustmark approved, and our various past 2030 and 2035 quality approvals in their business. So it will help the larger installation businesses rather than the one-man trades.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the one-man trades being 80% of the construction industry.
Indeed.
We've also got a few questions on vehicle to grid systems, if we want to just touch back on that. Do they, where do we see that? That people are suggesting that is, 5 years down the line? Is that?
Well, it's already, the technology exists already. It's a case of deployment, and I think I've been saying this a few times before on previous things, but all of this stuff is designed and exists. There's parts of the world where this is already a reality, and there's projects already in the UK. So don't really want to go too much into vehicle to grid, because this is about heating, not vehicles. But just touching back on Ben about the financial piece, it's the way things are today with heat pumps is that they do typically cost a lot more than a gas boiler system, and there's aspects to that because of things we've already discussed about insulation and larger radiators and whatever. But there does seem to be a bit of a premium in these systems at the moment, and it's quite hard for me to understand it looking at the raw numbers. The air to water heat pump is around about sort of £3,000-4,000. So a gas boiler is decent ones £1,000 to £2,000. So that doesn't really explain all of the additional costs that you might see with an air to water heat pump retrofit, which can be double the cost of a typical boiler system, and it does make you wonder. But yeah, the finance piece is a barrier, and there will need to be that capital investment, and that is another area that's being looked at by the industry of how all these things can be financed along with a retrofit package to the homes. Yeah,
different ways to do that. Interesting. And another barrier, just to touch upon, which is a good question from Vaughan here. How do we approach getting the existing heating installer base upskilled fast enough to really accelerate the adoption of some of these technologies? You know, do we see that as a barrier? What are the maybe Steve or Jonathan could talk about sort of your story.
Again, will you?
Steve, yeah.
Yeah, it's easy enough to do. I think a lot of boys should start, and girls really, whatever, should start doing it now with their gas boilers. If they're installing gas boilers or gas systems still now, you should be installing low temperature systems anyway. And having that initial play around with the low temperature system and the design of the system with a gas boiler that's a lot more forgiving, they'll start being able to hone their sort of technique now. Okay, there's a difference with the Delta T's and all that kind of stuff, but you know, even modern systems should be going in ready, in my opinion. You just got to play around with the velocities where you want to land when you do change over. That's all on the pipe sizing. But there's a lot of really good courses. You've got Kim, who's running the heating consultants and all them. You've got Rob's, all those things, manufacturers courses. There's courses out there. You just need to jump on them, go on them, and have a little play, and then just start installing. It's you can sit down and design at home. You know, you can just sit there calculating things out. You don't have to be doing it actually on it. You start doing that kind of things, and social media, ask. There's all of us on there that are more than happy to answer any questions or play around with things and guide you through it. Right? So it's easy enough to just jump in. That's all.
Thanks, Steve. And then final couple of few minutes, guys. Maybe I'll just ask. There's a whole bunch of questions still coming through, so perhaps there are some that we can get to, and some that we might answer afterwards, after the session. But I would love to just get a final few sort of takeaway thoughts from everyone here who's been on the panel. Brett, could I start with you? You know, state of play, where are we at? What would be your one wish that you'd like to see on this journey?
In the immediate short term, I would like ministers to take decisions about some of the things we've talked about. I mentioned at the beginning the building regulations decisions, because we've still got a number of people on furlough. Some of the building regs changes would come in October. You know, how we lead out of post-COVID recovery, how you negotiate contracts and begin to start learning the kind of specifications and that we've talked about. So my immediate hope or plea, if all my fingers are crossed here, is number one, immediate decisions soon on a range of things that have been hanging around just a little too long for wholly understandable reasons, so that industry, my companies, your companies, can begin to plan and get the message out. Obviously, secondly, is we do need to see, both from Mr. Sunak's announcement last week of what the Green Homes grant and the voucher scheme is going to look like. Now, clearly, we've been told that doesn't happen until September. You know, I've been through 4 boiler scrappage schemes. Again, if those of you remember 10 years back when Mr. Ed Miliband was Climate Change Secretary, I can remember we were called in at extremely short notice before Christmas 10 years ago. We did all that. That scheme, how you bring a scheme in the same way that Rob and Steve have talked about, that a lot of the technology existing here, a lot of the admin procedure of how you get money out the door to the SME installers. We've done it 4 times. So the situation is, my final piece there will be, a lot of this is already around and doable. Be bold, be brave, and hold your collective nerve, because we will get to net zero. Maybe not, we might go down a few blind alleys, but hold your nerve, because I still think that industry and business and science sort of know how to get there. And I think the public want us to get there, but tax and planning permission and those kind of governmental things, they're behind the curve. That would be my message to all of the visitors and guests today.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Maybe I could go to Jonathan next.
Without sounding boring, my answer is fabric first. If we can improve the quality of the heat loss of our housing stock, that is the key to everything, I think.
Thanks, Jonathan. Steve, are you able to come off mute?
Yeah. As Jonathan says, less is less no matter what. So if you can push it down, you're pushing it down regardless of what you're heating with. My thing is people need to start installing low temperature regardless you're doing. You know, if you start pushing down it, I have never come across a system that needs to be above 50 degrees. Even in 400-year-old houses, 50 degrees is more, even going through underfloor and all that kind of stuff. So there's huge benefits for low temperature. So as soon as you start playing with low temperature, all the design aspects will just they'll just make sense. So even with the gas boys, when they're putting them in, they may as well just start putting low temperature in now. So they start doing it when they do switch over to heat pumps. Inevitably, it's going to be a lot simpler for them. That's my anyway.
Thanks, Steve. And Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been some unclear sort of situations and policy maybe with renewables in the past, but I think we're beyond that now. It's 100% clear that electrified heat will be a thing going forward. It is already, and yeah, just to encourage installers to read up on it in the usual ways. We usually talk about, you know, Twitter, manufacturers' courses. Install it yourself in your own home, get comfortable with it, and understand the differences and the benefits, really, because this is the future. Alongside existing boilers, whether they're going to be gas or hydrogen, they're not going away, but the future will be electrified in many different ways, and there's a really good business model to follow here. Appreciate that a lot of the guys are gas installers, and that's their trade they know and love. That won't go away anytime soon. But yeah, there is additional ways to heat your home, and a heat pump is a great way to do it. And you know, the existing controls and systems will work with them, so they're not as scary as you might think.
Brilliant, thanks, Rob. And I'd just like to end with sort of a big thank you to you all for joining, to Jonathan, Rob, Steve, Brett. Thank you so much for your time joining today and battling through some fairly significant technology issues. Hopefully we can all get high-speed internet before 2050 as well. And thanks to everyone for listening, to kind of putting up with some of our sort of connection feeds that we had there, and for all your questions. We got through probably only managed to get through about half of your questions there. So some of those we'll hopefully take away. Some I think will be more relevant for some of the future sessions that we've got coming up on hydrogen, for example, tomorrow. So I look forward to hopefully seeing you again there. And thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thanks again to our wonderful panel. Okay.
Thank you.
And see you again soon. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day, everybody.